Hello, welcome to the recorded demonstration for making some gelatin suppositories. So not everyone can be in for this lab, so hopefully this will give you an idea of the techniques and the process of actually making the gelatin suppositories, and it's quite an enjoyable lab. It's very much just like making a jelly at home, except in one of the most difficult molds that you've ever had to use. So you've got a lab learning pack as well, and on there that's got some directions for what you need to do and some other bits that you need to sort of do yourself. But what you need to get to before you actually start making the suppositories is to have a formula that you're going to use, or a recipe that you're going to use. We've got the master formula on there, which says that for this particular suppository you need to have 70% glycerol, 14% gelatin and 16% water. And you've been given a prescription for 6 suppositories to be made. So we'll generally make an excess, and an easy excess we can make with those is to make enough for 10 suppositories. We're making 1 gram suppositories, and these are 1 gram molds that we're going to be using. So 10 1 grams, we need to make 10 grams worth of our mixture to put into the molds and have an excess for any spillages or whatever that we make. The easiest thing to do for this, with the percentages, is to do everything by mass or weight. So we're not going to be using millilitres for water or millilitres for glycerol. We're going to be using grams for that. So we want to get to 10 grams at the end, ultimately, and we know we need 70% glycerol, 14% gelatin and 16% water. So that's very simple maths, hopefully for you, that we're going to be needing to have 7 grams of glycerol, 1.4 grams of gelatin and 1.6 grams of water at the end. We're going to need to use more water than that to begin with, but that's what we're going to end up with at the end. So in simple terms, we're going to heat all that up, mix it all together and pour it into molds. But then there's a certain process by which we need to go through and do that, which I'll take you through now, and I'm just going to readjust the camera so that you can see what I'm doing. So you can see that I've got everything out here that I need to use. I've got my gelatin, which comes as granules like that. I've got some distilled water here, just to save me going to the sink and back, and so we've all got our own water to use. And glycerol in this bottle here, which is obviously a very viscous, gloopy sort of liquid, which is actually the active ingredient for these suppositories. It acts as a mild irritant as it goes into the bowel to stimulate peristalsis, to stimulate you to go to the toilet. So I've got all my ingredients there. Obviously I've got an accurate balance as well, which we're going to use properly. We can see we've got the covers on it. I've got a water bath here, heating to 70 degrees centigrade, so it's warm enough for everything to go into solution or suspension and to be mixed together, but not too hot to change any of those ingredients too much. And we've got a collection of other tools that we're going to use here, some tongs, a spatula, thermometer, and a stirring rod. So remember, the thermometer isn't a stirring rod, it's delicate and you don't want to break it. A stirring rod is a stirring rod, less delicate, and it doesn't really matter if you break it. We don't want you to, it's not as big a deal. We have an evaporating dish to go on the water bath. Have a beaker to mix and go on the water bath. And we have weighing boats, foil, and we have our suppository mould, which I'll show you a close-up of. So that's the suppository mould. And we have a scraper here for taking off any excess along the top once we've poured the molds. So I'll get on and do what I need to do. So first step, I'm going to weigh my beaker. So I need to know how much this weighs for later on when we're going to be evaporating water and we need to know how much water we've got. So I've already zeroed my balance, or tared my balance. I'll take the top off there and just put that in the middle. I'll put the top back on to get an accurate weight so we don't have any wind causing any fluctuations. And I can see that weighs 20.537 grams. So I'm going to make a note of that, because I won't remember that, and I'll need to come back to that later. What I'm also going to do at this stage is I'm going to add up what the total mass would be with the water and the gelatin in there. Because later on we're going to have the water and the gelatin there, but we're going to have an excess of water, and we're going to evaporate the excess of water away until we have the right amount of water in there. So I need to know what mass that's going to look like, so I don't have to be doing maths on the go later on. So I've got 20.537 grams, and I know that I want to have 1.4 grams of gelatin and 1.6 grams of water. So that adds up to 3 grams. So essentially I'm looking for 23.537 grams in total with my gelatin and then my final volume of water later on. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put an excess of water into there. I'm going to put around 4 to 5 grams, 4 to 5 grams, not 45, of water in there, and then get that on the water bath to be heating up. Now we don't pour things in on the balance, or we don't weigh things in directly onto the balance, so I'm just going to pour directly into that beaker outside. I've got too much in there, but remember we don't ever put things back into the original container, so if I want to get rid of that, I'm going to pour a little bit down the sink, but let's just see how much I've got. So I've got 5.5 in there. I don't want quite that much, so let's get rid of a bit. Incidentally, it doesn't matter if you have slightly too much, it will just take you longer to evaporate off the excess water. I've got about 4.5 grams of water in there, 4.5 millilitres, so slap bang in the middle of where I want it. So that's fine. So I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to put that onto the water bath to get warming up. Now on these water baths, you can see we've got some concentric rings. The middle one you can take off with a little handle, no problem. But as you may or may not be able to see, there's now steam coming out of there. So 70 degrees is hot enough to burn yourself on, and that's why we're wearing gloves for this one. The ingredients aren't dangerous, but if you get some hot glycerol or hot gelatin on your skin, you know about it. So specs and gloves needed for that. So if we want to take off a different ring, we then use the tongs, so we can take off and have a larger well within which to put our vessel. In this case, I'm not going to need to do all of that. I'm just going to put the beaker straight on. And you can see here that these tongs fit very nicely around this beaker. You don't need to squeeze too hard and break it. And that fits, you can do it, that fits over the middle ring. Later on, when we put the evaporating dish on here, I'll take off more rings so this can sit properly inside. Okay, so we need to now work relatively quickly. We don't want all of that to evaporate away. So I'm going to weigh out 7 grams of glycerol and get that on the water bath as well. Now, you may want to do this into a weighing boat first, but I'm going to put that straight into the evaporating dish, 7 grams. And we're going to put around about 7 grams in there. So I don't know exactly how much 7 grams looks like. So I'll just take a cautious approach. Just put a small amount in and see how much that weighs. Incidentally, I zeroed this balance, I tared this balance before I did that. Okay, I've got 5.96 grams there, so I just need 1 more gram if I can be careful enough to put that in. Remember, as I said before, if I go over, it's fine to take a little bit out. I can use a spatula or something like that to take a bit out, but I don't put it back into the bottom of the syrup. I'll put it into a weighing boat or something, and we can put that into waste later. Brilliant. So, for the purposes of this demonstration, that's good enough. I've got 7.1 grams of glycerol in there. Ideally, we'd have it slightly more accurate than that, but for the purposes of this demonstration, let's say I've got 7 grams on the dot. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that off, and I'm going to re-zero this. Now this needs to go onto the water bath, and as I said before, I probably want a slightly larger ring. There we go, so I'll keep those together down there, and I've got both of those things now on the water bath. I'm just going to check how much of my water has evaporated at this point, so I don't have too little. Just going to wipe the bottom of that, so I don't weigh the condensation instead. I'm using the tongs here because this is probably quite warm. So that's at 25.16, so I've still got over 4 grams in there, so that's good. It might be fast enough. Get that back on the water bath. Okay. Okay, so I've got my 2 liquids, if you will, my water and my glycerol, warming up to 70 degrees. We're warming them to 70 degrees to aid the mixing, and so the gelatin actually will disperse and suspend through the water. So on that note, I need to weigh out 1.4 grams of gelatin. So I'm going to do that into a weighing boat. And of course, I need to zero or tar, tear, however you want to say it, my balance to do so. So on 0, I've got some gelatin here, and I've got a clean spatula. And I need to put 1.6 grams of gelatin into there. Again, I have no idea what 1.6 grams of gelatin looks like exactly. So we'll just take a rough mass. That's about half of what I need. So let's put about the same again. 2 grams, so I need another 400 milligrams. Let's see what we get. 4.27. I'm sure this is compulsive viewing for you, watching me weigh something out. We've nearly got 1.4 there. So you can see the way that I do this is that I'm almost going in smaller and smaller increments every time to get to the correct mass. Also, you're probably thinking, oh, Sir's not putting the lid on. That's because I'm getting a rough estimate at the minute. So now I'm at 1.583. I'm going to put the lid on and make sure that I've got an accurate mass. So that's 1.584, 1.583. So literally just the tiniest amount. Teeniest amount. And let's see how that goes. Feel free to fast forward this bit. 1.595. That's within error for this balance. So we're going to say that's 1.6 grams. Put the lid on there. And we've got our gelatin. So the next stage is to mix the gelatin and water together, just like you would for making a jelly at home. This is exactly the same process. So I'm going to take the water off of the water bath. Now I've only just weighed this, remember, so we know we've still got an excess of water, which will help to get this gelatin into suspension so that you can actually, then when it cools down, make a gel again, which is what we need. So I'm going to pour that directly in. Now this temperature will be dropping the whole time, so we want to work relatively quickly. You might have noticed that I very, very gingerly touched this beaker before I fully touched it. That's just because I was a bit worried that it might be too warm. So we don't want you to grab something that's too warm to grab. Now, what we can do at this stage, if it's cooling down too much, is with the tongs, put it back over the water bath and stir it with our glass rod. But we don't want to keep it on there for too long, at any one time if we're doing this. Just until we have a nice homogeneous gelatin mixture. And then remember, the next stage is for us to evaporate off all the excess water. But we need to have a nice homogeneous, not grainy, so no grains left, nice homogeneous gelatin mixture. And I'm going to bring that up to the camera so you can see what you need to do. Now you don't want it to be on there for too long because you don't want to create lots of bubbles in your mixture. You want a nice homogeneous, smooth mixture if you can. So just be careful in how you stir it. Now this isn't quite there. If I bring this up to the camera, you can see that that's still grainy. We've still got some grains in there. So still need to keep working on that. But you don't want to stir it too vigorously because we don't want to get lots of air bubbles in there. So we're nearly there now with this. I've still got some grains just sitting on the side of the beaker where I mixed it too vigorously at the beginning. So don't do that. Do as I say, not as I do. Now I'm just going to also wipe that off there on the side. I'm going to just weigh this again now. So I need to zero the balance and refer back to what I need to get to. I need to get to a final mass of 23.537 grams. So I'm just going to put that on the balance. And I can see I'm at 26.5. So I need to get rid of 3 grams of water. So this needs to be going on the water bath for a fairly long period of time. But we do need to keep checking how much we've got throughout that process. And this is just helping also that we're not quite fully suspended or dissolved in. Incidentally, you'll hear people say dissolving gelatin. We don't quite dissolve gelatin when we put it in. It is more somewhere between a suspension and a solution, because when it cools down, the big long chains of gelatin will cross-link with each other and be not quite in solution, and that's how we get our sort of semi-solid, our gel formation. So cross-links between long chains is how we're going to be getting that gel forming. And what we're doing when it's heated up is we're breaking those cross-links so they can flow freely over each other, giving enough energy into the system for them to flow freely over each other. But when we cool it down, we're removing energy from the system. So there's not enough energy to break those interchain bonds, and they can cross-link with each other again using intermolecular forces like hydrogen bonding, and form a network with which the gel will form. So what you'll find on this as well, what I should have done there, is you need to wipe off the condensation from the bottom of the beaker, because otherwise that will be adding to the mass that you are weighing out, that you're measuring. So I'm just going to quickly get rid of that water. You're not putting too much pressure on. If you need to clean the balance and put a lot of pressure on it, you just need to take the plate off the top. And then you can scrub to your heart's content without bending it. Make sure it's kept flat, so you can see I've got my hand across the whole bottom, and then I can clean it. Okay? That's the best way to clean the plate, and then obviously you can use a brush to get everything else off the balance. The reason we're so particular about that is because we want balances to continue to be accurate for a long period of time. So let's have another look here. I can see now I've got a much clearer mix. Again, I've still got some granules up the side of the beaker, so I'm going to need to work to get those incorporated. But the actual mixture at the bottom is a nice homogeneous mixture. So I will just do that work now to get those incorporated. You might struggle to get them all in. If it gets to the top and it forms a gel, then you might struggle to get every last little grain in. And don't worry too much about that. Obviously in this setting it's not going out to anyone. We want you to sort of get the process of it and know how it's done. But you can see I'm just pushing down those grains into the warmer bottom so they can be put into the suspension. And all this time, we need to be making sure as well, which I'm just about to do, that we don't remove too much water. Of course, if you do remove too much water and you want to save the product, you can warm up some water elsewhere and then add in that warm water to this. Think about why we wouldn't want to add cold water. You can see now I've started to get some of those grains from the top into the bottom. So, for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to say that that's reached the right mass. It's not quite there actually, but just for the purposes of the length of this video, let's say that's reached the right mass. And I'm just going to put those on there. Now I've got, obviously, my evaporating dish here with my now heated glycerol in it. So, you've got two choices, I suppose. You can pour, I would like to pour from the evaporating dish into the beaker and mix it, but the problem I've got with that is I'm going to have to use my tongs to pick up the evaporating dish, which is not necessarily the best thing to do. But you can see we've got a lip here on the evaporating dish as well, so I can pour from the beaker into the evaporating dish. So I'm just going to make sure that this is warm enough to pour, and I'm going to go that way around and then pour into my moulds. So I'm just going to get the mould over here now, because we don't want to let this cool down too much before we pour it. Before we pour it, we do just want to make sure on this mould that all of the caps are in place. So these caps will get taken off at the end of the process. We need to make sure that they're all in place. Otherwise you're just going to pour straight out the bottom. And this is where we're going to pour into. So I'm actually happy to hold this evaporating dish. If you're not, make sure you pour it the other way. So I'm going to pour that straight into here. It just minimises the waste that I'm going to get. More than one way to crack an egg. So let's put that in there. And get my stirring rod again. And I'm just going to make sure that's all nicely mixed. If you didn't have an excess of water at this point, you would probably need to do this slightly quicker, but I've still got a little bit of excess, so I'm just being a bit more cautious. Okay, so there we have our mixture, which we can pour into our moulds. Remember that glass is probably going to be quite hot still, and you'd want to do this on a flat surface, but I'm going to come over here so you can see what I'm doing. You definitely would want to do this on a flat surface. So I'm just going to pour that directly into these moulds. Now there's no contraction of gelatin when it cools down, so we don't need to have an excess. We don't need it to be bulging over the top. Obviously if you get a bit of a bulge, that's not a problem, because like I'm doing there, you see there's a bit of a bulge. There we go. So I've got an excess there, but remember I still had a bit too much water in that. So these suppositories will probably be a bit flimsy because there's probably a bit too much water content still in them. But you can see on the top there I've got a bit of an excess, but that's no problem. Once that cools down, to make sure we've got nice even suppositories, what we'll do is we'll scrape across the top of them and then we'll get them out. So I'm just going to pause the video whilst they cool down, and then once they're cool, we'll be back again and we'll take one out and wrap it up. So the suppositories have had roughly 10 minutes, or actually in this case a couple of hours, to set and be ready to be removed. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Then I'm going to show you how to wrap them and go through a few questions, things that you might want to think about suppositories in general, and then specifically these suppositories. And we should end up with some nicely wrapped suppositories like that. So I'm just going to re-angle the camera so you can see what I'm doing with my hands. There we go. So we've ended up with a full mould of 6 suppositories, like so. And you can see on the top we've got a little bit of excess where I over poured some of the moulds. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to scrape that off to make them appear even, to give them an even dose, and to make them easier to take out of the mould. And the way we're going to do that is by using a scraper, nothing fancy, just a plastic scraper, and we put the flat side down and push across. like so. Maybe do that a couple of times just to get everything off. Perfect. So now we've got even suppositories in a suppository mould. Now we need to get them out. Now the old style moulds, you'd have two halves and you'd break open the mould and you'd have the suppositories there. I think they're better for doing suppositories, but we're using these ones. So first of all, you need to take the tip off of each individual mould. So we do that, we'll give it a little twist, just a little twist, and then very gently ease off the mould tip. Keep that safely to one side, put it in the camera view, put that safely to one side, and then we can see that we have an exposed suppository tip there. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push that from the back just slightly, just to get it going, and at the same time I will gently wiggle and ease the suppository out, and this is where it's going to break and I'm going to look a fool. Hopefully it won't. You can see they take a bit of persuasion to come out, and there you go. So that came out once it had unstuck from the side, so you can see we've got a clean mould and we're left with one glycerol suppository, like so. So we're going to wrap that now, and we're going to do that just with a small square of foil. Now you can do this however you'd like, just to sort of make it look elegant or nice. The way I like to do that is to take my square of foil and I put the suppository just in one corner, like that. Put the suppository just in one corner like that, and then I roll the first bit over, and then just continue rolling it till we get a silver cylinder, or sort of cigarette looking thing. Now you can either twist the ends like a sweet, if you like that, or you can fold over onto the suppository, like so. I prefer folding it onto the suppository as opposed to the sweetie wrapper technique, so that you get left with a small silver tube looking thing like so. Okay, so obviously you can pause, stop, go back and repeat that if you like, but essentially we've taken it out of there, we've gently taken off the cap, given the suppository a little push from behind, and then gently forwards and backwards, trying not to split the suppository, coaxed it out. Okay, and that's what you need to do to take it out and then put it in the foil wrapping. So there's just a few things to think about with suppositories before we move on, and I'll let you go. So first thing, have a think about what is the active ingredient in these suppositories. So the active ingredient is glycerol in this case, and the gelatin and water are just there as a vehicle to deliver the glycerol. So the glycerol in this case is being used to treat constipation. So it's going to directly stimulate the bowel and cause a bit of irritation and cause you to have more of an urge to go to the toilet. There are other benefits to suppositories though, not these ones. If we were to give something like paracetamol or diclofenac as a suppository, what we would be doing there is bypassing what's called first pass hepatic metabolism, or hepatic first pass, however you want to call it. So by going into the anus, into the rectum, we go directly to systemic blood flow, and that avoids going to the liver and having metabolism of the drug. So not only do we get the drug into the systemic blood flow quicker, we also might get more of the drug without having any metabolism from the liver. So that's a real benefit. But for some drugs, we might not want that. Some drugs, we might give what's called a prodrug, which needs to be metabolized by the liver to be activated. So we have to have that orally. That might be something like clopidogrel, which is an antiplatelet drug. So that's some of the other benefits of suppositories. Of course, they're useful if you can't swallow, and also for direct action in that area. Now, when we give out these suppositories, we have to be careful with the sort of counselling that we give. So you take a look at that there. One of the first things we might want to remind the patient is to take it out of the packaging as well. Obviously, you wouldn't want to insert that. It would be very painful, and it wouldn't do its job. So we would advise them first to unwrap the suppository before using it, like so. Then we might also say, well, for ease of insertion, we might want you to lubricate the tip. And in this case, we just use some water because that would start to swell the gelatin and make it more lubricated. So it's easier to put in. Now, it's not such a problem with these suppositories, but say we were giving paracetamol as a suppository, we then also need to counsel that they use it after they've gone to the toilet. You don't want to put it in and then go to the toilet only to sort of void it out again and it not to be able to do its job. Other things to consider are making sure that they don't swallow the suppository as well, and that they wash their hands after they've inserted it. So that's how you might make a suppository in a small batch sort of fashion, and some of the considerations that you need to think about when giving out suppositories.